Marcus Chen had been walking the streets of London for 3 hours, his camera hanging around his neck like a tourist badge. The 28-year-old software engineer from San Francisco was on his first solo trip to Europe, and every corner seemed to hold a new adventure. What people didn't know about Marcus was that behind his quiet demeanor and thick-rimmed glasses lay 15 years of dedicated martial arts training. He held a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo and had recently earned his second-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones as Marcus approached Buckingham Palace. He had seen it in movies and documentaries countless times, but standing before the actual gates felt surreal. The iconic red-uniformed guards stood motionless at their posts, their tall black bearskin hats making them appear even more imposing. Marcus pulled out his phone to capture the moment, just like hundreds of other tourists around him. As he snapped photos, Marcus noticed something peculiar. One of the guards seemed different from the others. While his colleagues maintained their stoic expressions and rigid postures, this particular guard kept glancing around nervously. His name tag read Thompson, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Despite the cool October weather, Marcus, always observant due to his martial arts training, sensed tension in the young man's body language. The crowd around the palace gates was unusually thick that day. A group of school children pressed against the barriers, their teachers struggling to keep them organized. Japanese tourists clicked away with expensive cameras, while a street performer nearby drew his own audience with magic tricks. The atmosphere should have been festive, but Marcus felt an undercurrent of unease. Thompson, the nervous guard, was only 22 years old and had been with the Royal Guard for just 8 months. This was supposed to be a routine day, but he had received troubling news that morning. Intelligence reports suggested a potential security threat during the afternoon shift. Nothing concrete, just whispers of suspicious activity in the area. His training told him to remain alert but maintain composure. However, his inexperience made every shadow seem threatening. Marcus continued his tourist routine, but his trained eye kept returning to Thompson. The guard's breathing pattern was irregular, a clear sign of stress that Marcus recognized from his own competition days. In martial arts, reading an opponent's state of mind often meant the difference between victory and defeat. Right now, Thompson looked like a man expecting trouble. The first sign of real trouble came at exactly 3:47 p.m. A man in a dark jacket began walking purposefully toward the palace gates. Unlike the meandering tourists, his movement was direct and focused. He kept his hands in his pockets and his head slightly down, avoiding eye contact with the guards. Marcus noticed him immediately because the man's gait reminded him of fighters he had faced who were trying to hide their training. Thompson saw the man too, and his hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. The movement was subtle, but Marcus caught it. Years of sparring had taught him to notice the smallest changes in body position. Something was definitely wrong, but Marcus wasn't sure what he should do. He was just a tourist with a camera, not a security expert. The man in the dark jacket stopped about 20 feet from the gates. He pulled out what looked like a phone but held it at an odd angle. Marcus realized the man was either recording or preparing to do something else entirely. The device seemed too bulky to be a regular smartphone. Thompson must have noticed the same thing because his entire body tensed like a coiled spring. Other tourists continued their sightseeing, oblivious to the growing tension. A family from Germany posed for photos while their teenage daughter rolled her eyes at her parents' enthusiasm. The street performer had moved closer to the palace gates, and his magic show now competed with the spectacle of the changing guard ceremony that would begin in 30 minutes. Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His martial arts training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct screamed that something dangerous was about to happen. But what could he do? He was a foreign tourist who didn't even know if his suspicions were justified. Interfering with royal security could land him in serious trouble, possibly even jail. The man with the device raised it higher, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what looked like an antenna. This definitely wasn't a normal phone. Thompson, apparently, reached the same conclusion because he began moving slowly toward the potential threat. His movements were controlled but purposeful, the kind of advance Marcus recognized from his own training when approaching a dangerous opponent. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of staying back like a good tourist, he began walking parallel to Thompson, using the crowd as cover. His years of training had taught him how to move without drawing attention, how to position himself for maximum advantage while appearing casual. If something did happen, he wanted to be close enough to help. The crowd seemed to sense the growing tension even if they didn't understand it. Conversations became quieter, and several people began looking around nervously. Children stopped running around as freely, and their parents held them closer. The street performer's magic tricks continued, but even he seemed distracted, glancing toward the guards more frequently. Thompson was now within 15 feet of the suspicious man who had noticed the guard's approach. Instead of moving away like an innocent person might, the man stepped closer to the palace gates. His free hand remained in his pocket, and Marcus could see the outline of something angular, pressed against the fabric. The object could have been anything, but combined with the strange device and the man's behavior, Marcus's alarm bells were ringing at maximum volume. The next few seconds would determine whether Marcus's instincts were correct or whether he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. One thing was certain, his quiet European vacation was about to become anything but peaceful. The moment everything changed came without warning. The man in the dark jacket suddenly pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing not a weapon, but a small remote control device. At the same time, he raised the antenna-equipped device higher and pressed several buttons. Thompson reacted instantly, his training kicking in as he rushed forward with his rifle ready. "Stop right there," Thompson shouted, his voice carrying across the courtyard and causing tourists to freeze in place. The authority in his voice was unmistakable, despite his youth and obvious nervousness. "Put the device down immediately." Marcus watched as chaos erupted around them. Tourists began screaming and running in different directions. Parents grabbed their children, and the street performer abandoned his magic tricks to dive behind a nearby bench. But instead of running away like everyone else, Marcus found himself moving closer to the action. His martial arts training had conditioned him to move toward danger rather than away from it. The suspicious man didn't comply with Thompson's order. Instead, he backed toward the palace gates while keeping the device raised. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he shouted back, but his actions contradicted his words. He was clearly trying to get closer to the palace, and the device in his hands was definitely not a normal phone. Thompson advanced carefully, his weapon trained on the suspect but his finger off the trigger. Royal Guard protocol was strict about when deadly force could be used, and despite the suspicious circumstances, no immediate threat to life had been established. "Put the device down and step away from the gates," Thompson commanded again, his voice steadier now that action had begun. Marcus positioned himself about 30 feet away, close enough to help, but far enough to avoid becoming a target if shooting started. His black belt training had taught him to assess multiple threats simultaneously, and right now he was scanning for additional dangers. Was this man working alone, or were there others in the crowd? His eyes swept the fleeing tourists, looking for anyone moving against the flow or showing unusual calm in the chaos. That's when Marcus spotted the real threat. While everyone's attention was focused on the man with the device, another figure was approaching from the opposite direction. This person moved differently, with the controlled grace of someone with serious combat training. He was older, maybe 45, with gray hair and wearing a businessman's suit. But the way he walked reminded Marcus of his Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors, balanced, centered, ready to explode into action. The businessman had something in his right hand, concealed against his leg. Marcus couldn't see what it was, but the way the man held his arm suggested it was heavy and probably dangerous. More concerning was his trajectory. He was moving to flank Thompson, while the young guard's attention was completely focused on the man with the device. Marcus realized he was witnessing a coordinated attack. The man with the device was a distraction, drawing the guard's attention while the real threat approached from behind. Thompson had no idea he was about to be caught, in a trap, and by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. Every instinct told Marcus to shout a warning, but he hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if the businessman was just another tourist trying to escape the chaos? Interfering with royal security based on a hunch could ruin his life. But as he watched the man's approach, Marcus's doubts evaporated. The stranger's movement was too purposeful, too professional. This was definitely a coordinated attack. The decision made itself. Marcus couldn't live with himself if he stood by and watched a young soldier get hurt or killed because he was too afraid to act. He had spent 15 years training his body and mind for moments like this, even if he had never expected to face them outside a tournament. "Behind you!" Marcus shouted to Thompson while simultaneously breaking into a run toward the businessman. His voice cut through the chaos and Thompson's head snapped around just as the suited attacker raised his weapon, a telescoping baton that extended with a metallic click. The businessman's eyes locked onto Marcus as he charged forward, and Marcus saw immediate recognition there. This was no ordinary criminal. He had military or law enforcement training, possibly both. The way he shifted his stance and adjusted his grip on the baton showed professional competence. Marcus was about to face the most dangerous opponent of his life. Thompson tried to turn and address the new threat, but he was caught between two attackers. The man with the device took advantage of the guard's momentary distraction and lunged forward, trying to tackle him. Thompson stumbled but managed to keep his footing, his rifle swinging wildly as he tried to cover both threats simultaneously. Marcus covered the distance to the businessman in 4 quick strides, his mind automatically shifting into combat mode. Time seemed to slow down as his training took over. He could see the baton coming toward his head in a vicious overhead strike, could calculate the angle and timing needed to avoid it. His body moved with practiced precision, stepping offline and raising his left arm to block while his right hand shot forward in a straight punch toward his opponent's solar plexus. The businessman was skilled, but he hadn't expected to face someone with Marcus's level of training. He managed to partially deflect the punch with his free hand, but the impact still drove him backward several steps. His counterattack with the baton whistled through empty air as Marcus ducked and moved to his opponent's weak side. "Get away. From here," the businessman growled, his accent revealing Eastern European origins. "This is not your fight." "You made it my fight when you attacked a soldier," Marcus replied, settling into a fighting stance that combined elements from both his martial arts disciplines. His weight was evenly distributed, his hands up but relaxed, his eyes focused on his opponent's center mass rather than the weapon. Behind him, Marcus could hear Thompson struggling with the first attacker. The young guard was shouting orders, while trying to control his opponent and maintain possession of his weapon. More guards would be arriving soon. Palace security protocol demanded rapid response to any incident. But Marcus couldn't count on their arrival. He had to end this confrontation quickly, before the businessman could seriously injure him or help his partner overwhelm Thompson. The next exchange came fast and brutal. The businessman feinted with the baton toward Marcus's ribs, then reversed direction and struck at his knee. Marcus saw through the deception and jumped backward, the weapon missing his leg by inches. As the attacker committed to the strike, Marcus stepped forward and grabbed the extended arm with both hands. What happened next demonstrated why Marcus had spent years studying both striking and grappling arts. Using leverage and timing rather than pure strength, he twisted the businessman's arm while stepping behind him. The baton clattered to the ground as the attacker found himself trapped in a standing arm lock that threatened to dislocate his shoulder if he resisted. "Stay down or I'll break it," Marcus warned, applying just enough pressure to make his point clear. The businessman was strong and skilled, but he was also smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. He stopped struggling and allowed Marcus to control him. The real test would be whether Marcus could maintain control long enough for help to arrive, and whether Thompson could handle his opponent without getting hurt. The next few minutes would determine whether Marcus's split-second decision to get involved had saved lives or made everything worse. Marcus maintained his grip on the businessman's arm while scanning the situation around him. Thompson was still wrestling with the first attacker near the palace gates, but the young guard was clearly struggling. The man with the device had proven to be stronger than expected, and Thompson's rifle had become more of a liability than an asset in close combat. "Thompson, use your training," Marcus shouted while keeping pressure on his own opponent's arm. Don't let him get behind you. The businessman in Marcus's control tried to twist free, testing the hold with small movements. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he hissed through gritted teeth. These people deserve what's coming to them. Marcus increased the pressure slightly, causing the man to gasp in pain. The only thing coming is your arrest, he replied calmly. His voice carried no anger, just the steady confidence he had developed through years of tournament competition. Save your energy for the interrogation. The sound of running boots on cobblestones announced the arrival of additional guards. Marcus felt a wave of relief. Reinforcements were finally coming. But his relief turned to concern when he saw only 2 guards approaching, and they looked confused about what exactly was happening. The chaos of fleeing tourists and conflicting shouts had made it difficult for them to assess the situation quickly. Armed, suspects attacking the gates, Marcus called out to the approaching guards. One is fighting with Thompson, I have the other one controlled. The lead guard, a sergeant with 20 years of experience, quickly took charge of the scene. Jenkins, help Thompson. Rodriguez, cover the civilian holding the suspect. His commands were sharp and clear, cutting through the confusion like a blade. As guard Jenkins moved to assist Thompson, the first attacker made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing to grapple with the young soldier, he suddenly released his hold and pulled out a small knife that had been concealed in his boot. The blade was only 4 inches long, but in close combat, that was more than enough to be deadly. Thompson saw the knife and tried to bring his rifle to bear, but the angle was wrong and his opponent was too close. The attacker lunged forward with the blade aimed at Thompson's throat, and for a moment it looked like the young guard might not survive his first real combat experience. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could maintain control of his own prisoner and ensure that threat was neutralized, or he could release the businessman and try to help Thompson. Both options carried enormous risks, but Marcus's martial arts philosophy had always emphasized protecting others over protecting himself. Don't move or I'll snap it, he warned his captive, then suddenly released the arm lock and sprinted toward Thompson. The businessman stumbled forward, momentarily stunned by the unexpected freedom, but Marcus was already 10 feet away and moving fast. The knife was descending toward Thompson's neck when Marcus arrived. Using a technique from his taekwondo training, he launched himself into a flying sidekick that caught the attacker in the ribs with devastating force. The impact lifted the man off his feet and sent him sprawling across the cobblestones, the knife skittering away into the crowd of fleeing tourists. Marcus landed hard, but rolled to absorb the impact, coming up in a defensive crouch. The attacker wasn't getting up anytime soon. Marcus had felt ribs crack under his kick, and the man was curled up, gasping for breath. Thompson stood frozen for a moment, his rifle aimed at the downed suspect, his face pale with the realization of how close he had come to serious injury or death. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked the young guard while keeping his eyes on both attackers. "No, I'm fine," Thompson stammered, his voice shaky but determined. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "You would have handled it," Marcus interrupted, though they both knew that probably wasn't true. "You're trained for this, I just gave you some backup." The businessman Marcus had been holding was back on his feet now, but guard Rodriguez had him covered with his weapon. The man looked at Marcus with a mixture of respect and hatred. "You fight well for a tourist," he said grudgingly, "but you don't understand the bigger picture." "I understand enough," Marcus replied. "I understand that attacking innocent people is wrong no matter what your cause." Sergeant Williams approached Marcus cautiously, unsure how to handle a civilian who had just helped neutralize 2 armed attackers. The situation was unprecedented in his experience. Royal Guard protocols didn't cover what to do when a tourist with martial arts skills intervened in a security incident. "Sir, I need you to step back from the suspects and keep your hands visible," Williams said professionally. "We appreciate your assistance, but we need to secure the scene now." Marcus nodded and moved away from the downed attackers, his hands held out from his sides in a non-threatening position. "Of course, Sergeant. I'm just glad everyone is okay." As additional security personnel arrived and began processing the scene, Marcus found himself in an increasingly surreal situation. Paramedics checked the attacker he had kicked for internal injuries, while bomb disposal experts examined the device the first man had been carrying. It turned out to be a sophisticated electronic jamming device designed to interfere with the palace's security communications. The businessman was searched and revealed to be carrying false identification documents, several different phones, and what appeared to be detailed floor plans of parts of Buckingham Palace. This had been no random attack. It was a carefully planned operation with objectives that went far beyond simple assault. Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison arrived 30 minutes later to take charge of the investigation. She was a tall woman, in her 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the crime scene. When she approached Marcus, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Chen, I presume," she said, consulting her notebook. "I understand you played quite a significant role in stopping this attack." "I just did what anyone would do," Marcus replied, though he knew that wasn't exactly true. "Most people would have run away, not toward the danger." "I seriously doubt that," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Most tourists don't have third-degree black belts in multiple martial arts. We ran your passport through our system. Quite an impressive competition record." Marcus felt a moment of concern. "Am I in trouble for getting involved?" "That remains to be determined," Morrison said, her expression becoming serious again. "What I can tell you is that you may have prevented something much worse than a simple assault. These men weren't just random attackers. They appear to be part of a larger operation that we've been tracking for months." The detective's words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had thought he was just helping a young soldier in trouble, but apparently he had stumbled into something much more significant. The implications were starting to sink in, and Marcus realized his quiet vacation had just taken a very dangerous turn. As crime scene photographers documented everything and forensics teams collected evidence, Marcus found himself wondering what he had really gotten himself into. The businessman's words about a bigger picture echoed in his mind, suggesting that today's incident was just the beginning of something larger and more threatening than anyone yet understood. Detective Inspector Morrison led Marcus to a quiet corner of the palace courtyard, away from the chaos of the ongoing investigation. Crime scene tape now surrounded the area where the attack had occurred, and forensics teams worked methodically to collect evidence. The afternoon sun had given way to early evening shadows, casting long lines across the ancient stones. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some detailed questions about what you observed today," Morrison began, pulling out a digital recorder. "But first, I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is sensitive information. The two men you helped apprehend are part of something we've been investigating for 8 months." Marcus nodded, still processing the surreal nature of his situation. 6 hours ago, he had been a tourist with a camera. Now he was apparently involved in a major security investigation. "What kind of operation are we talking about?" "We call it Operation Blackout," Morrison explained, her voice low and serious. "These individuals are part of an international group that has been targeting government buildings and royal residences across Europe. Their goal appears to be disrupting security communications during major events, creating windows of vulnerability for larger attacks." The detective showed Marcus a tablet displaying surveillance photos from similar incidents in Paris, Madrid, and Rome. In each case, teams of 2 or 3 people had attempted to use electronic jamming devices near important government buildings. Most had been caught before they could complete their missions, but a few had succeeded in temporarily blinding security systems. "The device the first attacker was carrying today is the most sophisticated we've seen yet," Morrison continued. "Our technical team believes it could have disrupted not just communications, but also some of the electronic security measures protecting the palace. If they had succeeded in activating it, they could have created a 15-minute window where our response capabilities would have been severely compromised." Marcus felt a chill as the implications became clear. "You're saying there was supposed to be a follow-up attack?" "We're working under that assumption," Morrison confirmed. "The timing of today's incident coincides with several high-profile visitors who are scheduled to arrive at the palace tomorrow. If our security had been compromised during their visit..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood that he had inadvertently helped prevent what could have been a much larger and more deadly attack. The thought was both frightening and overwhelming. There's something else, Morrison continued, her expression becoming even more serious. The businessman you subdued, his real name is Viktor Petrov, and he's a former Spetsnaz operator who has been connected to at least 6 similar operations across 3 countries. The fact that he's here, personally involved in this mission, suggests that whatever they're planning is significant. Marcus remembered the way Petrov had moved, the professional competence he had displayed even while being controlled by the armlock. He definitely had serious training. I got lucky that I caught him off guard. You did more than get lucky, Morrison said with a slight smile. According to the video footage we've reviewed, you handled yourself like someone with extensive combat experience. Petrov outweighs you by 60 pounds and has killed people with his bare hands. The fact that you controlled him so effectively tells me your martial arts training goes beyond tournament competition. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just reacted. I saw Thompson in danger and tried to help. Which brings me to the next issue, Morrison said, her tone shifting to something more formal. Officially, you're not supposed to be involved in any of this. You're a civilian, a foreign national, and you have no legal authority to detain suspects or engage in combat with potential terrorists. The word terrorists hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been thinking of the attackers as criminals, but the reality was apparently much more serious. Am I going to be charged with something? That's being debated at levels far above my pay grade, Morrison admitted. On one hand, you potentially prevented a major security breach and saved the life of a British soldier. On the other hand, you took actions that could have gone very wrong and complicated an ongoing international investigation. Before Marcus could respond, Sergeant Williams approached their conversation area. His expression was troubled, and he was carrying a secure radio that was crackling with urgent communications. Inspector, we have a problem, Williams said without preamble. Central Command is reporting unusual activity at 3 other locations around London. It appears today's incident was just one part of a coordinated operation. Morrison's face went pale as she took the radio. Marcus could hear fragments of the urgent conversations, reports of suspicious individuals near Parliament, unusual electronic signals detected near the Tower of London, and increased chatter on monitored communication channels associated with terrorist groups. How long until the security protocols are fully implemented? Morrison asked Williams. 20 minutes for complete lockdown, but that assumes no additional incidents, Williams replied. If they hit us again while we're transitioning to high alert status? Morrison turned back to Marcus and he could see a new calculation taking place behind her eyes. Mr. Chen, I'm going to ask you something that goes far beyond my normal authority, but circumstances are forcing some unusual decisions. Marcus waited, sensing that his life was about to change even more dramatically. We need someone who can recognize these operatives if we encounter them again, Morrison continued. Someone who has seen them in action and understands their capabilities. More importantly, we need someone with your particular skills in case we face similar situations at other locations. You're asking me to help with an active terrorism investigation? Marcus asked, hardly believing what he was hearing. I'm asking you to consider remaining available as a consultant while we deal with the immediate crisis, Morrison clarified. Your tourist visa allows you to be in the country legally, and your actions today demonstrate both competence and good judgment under pressure. Marcus looked around at the crime scene, at the guards still processing evidence, at the reinforcements that continued to arrive as the sun set over London. His quiet vacation had disappeared completely, replaced by something that felt like a movie plot. But the serious expressions on everyone's faces reminded him that this was completely real. What exactly would I be doing? He asked. For now, just remaining available, Morrison said. If we locate other members of this network, we might need your help identifying them or understanding their tactics. And if we face similar situations, she gestured toward the area where Marcus had subdued Petrov. Well, you've proven you can handle yourself in a crisis. Thompson approached their group, moving with more confidence than he had shown earlier in the day. The young guard had been transformed by the afternoon's events, his nervous energy replaced by focused determination. Sir, Thompson said to Marcus, I wanted to thank you properly. I know my training should have been enough, but having backup made all the difference. If there's ever anything I can do to return the favor." Marcus shook hands with the young soldier, noting that Thompson's grip was now steady and strong. "You would have figured it out. Sometimes we all need a little help." "Actually," Morrison interjected, "Guard Thompson raises an interesting point. If Mr. Chen does agree to assist us temporarily, having someone familiar with his capabilities could be valuable. Thompson, how would you feel about serving as Mr. Chen's liaison with Palace Security?" Thompson's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I'd be honored, Inspector. After today, I'd trust Mr. Chen with my life." Marcus realized that he was being drawn deeper into a situation that was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. But as he looked at the faces around him, professionals who were dealing with a serious threat to innocent people, he knew he couldn't simply walk away and return to his hotel as if nothing had happened. The decision to get involved had been made the moment he chose to help Thompson. Everything that followed was just a continuation of that same choice. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded to Morrison. "All right, Inspector, what do you need me to do?" 3 hours later, Marcus found himself in an unmarked van racing through London's evening traffic alongside Detective Inspector Morrison and a team of armed police officers. The interior of the vehicle was filled with radio chatter, laptop screens showing surveillance footage, and the controlled tension of professionals preparing for action. "Target location is a warehouse in South London," Morrison explained, pointing to a map on her tablet. "Intelligence suggests this is where the coordination for today's attacks originated. We have thermal imaging showing at least 6 individuals inside, and electronic surveillance indicates they're planning to move tonight." Marcus adjusted the tactical vest that had been provided to him, still hardly believing he was wearing police equipment and heading toward what might be another confrontation. "What's my role in this?" "Identification and backup," Morrison replied. "If any of the suspects inside match the fighting capabilities of the men from this afternoon, our officers might need someone who understands how to counter that kind of training." Thompson sat across from Marcus in the van, also wearing tactical gear but looking far more comfortable with it than Marcus felt. The young guard had volunteered to join the operation, arguing that his experience from the Palace incident made him valuable for the mission. "Remember," Morrison addressed the entire team, "these individuals have proven they're willing to fight and they have access to sophisticated equipment. We go in fast, we secure the suspects, and we avoid giving them time to destroy evidence or activate any devices they might have." The warehouse district appeared through the van's windows as they approached their destination. Rows of industrial buildings stretched into the darkness, most appearing abandoned or minimally used. It was the perfect location for clandestine operations, isolated with multiple escape routes and far from civilian populations. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, and he was surprised to see it was from his sister in San Francisco. "Having fun sightseeing? Hope you're staying out of trouble?" The message seemed to come from another world entirely, a reminder of his normal life that felt impossibly distant from his current situation. The van stopped 2 blocks away from the target warehouse, and the team prepared for their approach. Marcus watched the professionals around him checking equipment, reviewing assignments, and coordinating with other units through their radios. These people did this kind of work regularly, while he was completely out of his depth. "You nervous?" Thompson asked quietly as they prepared to exit the van. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "This morning I was planning to visit the British Museum. Now I'm about to raid a terrorist hideout." "Just remember what you did this afternoon," Thompson encouraged. "Trust your training and your instincts. They got you through the first situation." The approach to the warehouse required careful coordination with multiple teams. Surveillance units had identified 3 possible escape routes, and police units were positioned to cover each one. Marcus and Thompson were assigned to the main entry team, which would breach the front entrance while secondary teams secured the back and sides of the building. As they moved through the shadows toward their target, Marcus found his senses heightening in ways that reminded him of tournament competition. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement more deliberate. The difference was that this time, failure could mean far more than losing a match. The warehouse loomed ahead of them, a 3-story concrete structure with few windows and multiple loading dock doors. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures concentrated on the second floor with at least 2 individuals moving around what appeared to be electronic equipment. Morrison's voice came through their earpieces. All teams in position. Remember, we need these suspects alive if possible. They're our best lead to understanding the full scope of this operation. The breach came at exactly 9:47 p.m. Specialized police officers used explosive charges to simultaneously open 3 different entrances, flooding the building with armed personnel and shouted commands. Marcus followed Thompson through the main entrance, his heart pounding as they climbed a metal staircase toward the second floor. The suspects had been expecting trouble. Instead of surrendering when police announced their presence, they immediately began destroying equipment and preparing to fight. The sound of smashing electronics echoed through the building, punctuated by shouted commands in what sounded like Russian and Arabic. Marcus reached the second floor just as one of the suspects appeared at the top of the staircase. The man was large, probably 6'4" and heavily muscled, and he carried what looked like a crowbar. More concerning was his expression. This wasn't someone who planned to surrender peacefully. "Armed suspect, second floor stairwell." Thompson called into his radio while raising his weapon. "Stop and put down your weapon." Instead of complying, the suspect charged down the stairs toward them. Marcus had perhaps 2 seconds to decide whether to get out of the way and let Thompson handle the threat or to engage directly. The confined space of the stairwell made Thompson's rifle less effective, and the suspect's momentum gave him a significant advantage. Marcus stepped forward to meet the charge, his martial arts training automatically adjusting his stance for the narrow space. The crowbar came down in a vicious overhead swing that would have crushed his skull if it had connected. Instead, Marcus sidestepped and used the suspect's momentum against him, grabbing the weapon arm and using a judo throw to send the larger man tumbling down the stairs. The suspect hit the concrete landing hard but rolled and came up ready to continue fighting. Marcus followed him down, maintaining pressure and not allowing time for recovery. The crowbar had been lost in the fall, but the suspect pulled a knife from his belt with practiced speed. "Down on the ground now," Thompson shouted, but the suspect ignored him and lunged at Marcus with the knife. The attack came fast and professional. This was someone with serious blade fighting experience. Marcus used techniques from his Brazilian jiu-jitsu training to control the knife arm while taking the fight to the ground. The struggle was fierce, but brief. Within 30 seconds, Marcus had the suspect face down with the knife arm controlled and his other hand pressing the man's face against the concrete. "Suspect secured," Thompson called out while applying handcuffs. "Nice work, Marcus." But their victory was short-lived. Radio chatter from other teams indicated that several suspects had escaped through a tunnel system that hadn't shown up on building blueprints. Even worse, the equipment destruction had been partially successful. Much of the electronic evidence had been rendered useless before police could secure it. Morrison's voice crackled through their earpieces with urgent news. "All teams, we have a problem. Intelligence indicates the escaped suspects are heading toward Westminster. There's a state dinner scheduled there tonight with multiple foreign dignitaries." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The warehouse raid had been successful in capturing some of the operatives, but it appeared they had walked into a trap. The real target had never been the warehouse. It was a diversion designed to draw security resources away from the actual objective. "How many escaped?" Thompson asked into his radio while helping Marcus to his feet. "At least 4, possibly 6, came Morrison's reply. "And we just intercepted communications suggesting they have inside information about tonight's security arrangements." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. While they had been congratulating themselves on disrupting the terrorist network, the real attack was just beginning. The suspects they had captured were essentially sacrificial pawns, left behind to occupy police attention while the primary team moved toward their true target. Marcus looked at the handcuffed suspect at his feet. The man was smiling despite his capture, his expression suggesting he knew something they didn't. "You're too late," he said in accented English. "By the time you reach Westminster, it will already be over." "What's going to happen at Westminster?" Marcus demanded, but the suspect just continued smiling and refused to say anything more. Morrison appeared on the staircase, her face grim as she processed reports from multiple teams. "We need to move immediately. Counterterrorism units are..." Being deployed to Westminster, but they're 20 minutes out. We might be the closest available team. What about the captured suspects? Thompson asked. Local units will handle them, Morrison replied. Right now, our priority has to be stopping whatever's happening at the state dinner. As they rushed back toward their van, Marcus realized that his involvement in this operation had moved far beyond anything he could have imagined. The morning's tourist adventure had become an afternoon security incident, which had now evolved into a nighttime race to prevent what could be an international catastrophe. The van roared to life, and they began speeding through London toward Westminster, blue lights flashing and sirens wailing. Marcus sat in the back trying to process the magnitude of what they were facing. Foreign dignitaries, inside information, sophisticated planning. This wasn't just a terrorist attack, it was potentially an act of war disguised as terrorism. What do we know about the security at Westminster tonight? Marcus asked Morrison. Too much, apparently, she replied grimly. If these suspects really have inside information, they'll know exactly where the vulnerabilities are. The scene at Westminster was controlled chaos. Police vehicles lined every street, armed officers moved in coordinated patterns, and emergency lights painted the ancient buildings in alternating red and blue. Marcus, Thompson, and Morrison arrived to find a security perimeter that had been breached but not broken, with defenders still maintaining control of the inner approaches to the building. Commander James Harrison, head of Westminster Security, met them at the outer checkpoint. His face showed the strain of coordinating a complex response to an unprecedented threat. Inspector Morrison, thank God you're here. We have 4 confirmed intruders inside the building, and they've demonstrated knowledge of security systems that should be impossible for outsiders to possess. What's the status of the dignitaries? Morrison asked while checking her equipment. Secured in the Churchill room on the 3rd floor, but that's also created a problem, Harrison replied. The attackers seem to know exactly where they are, and they're moving systematically toward that location. We've lost contact with 2 security teams that were positioned between the intruders and their apparent target. Marcus studied the building blueprints that Harrison spread across the hood of a police vehicle. Westminster's maze of corridors, hidden passages, and multiple levels created countless opportunities for ambush and misdirection. The attackers had chosen their target well. Even with superior numbers, the defenders would struggle to cover every possible approach. Sir, Thompson interjected, pointing to a section of the blueprints. If they have inside knowledge of security arrangements, they might also know about the service passages that aren't on standard building plans. My unit studied Westminster security protocols during our rotation training. Harrison looked at the young guard with new interest. What kind of passages? Maintenance tunnels, old air raid shelters from World War II, even some medieval passages that were incorporated into the modern building structure, Thompson explained. If someone really wanted to move through this building without being detected, those routes would be their best option. Marcus examined the blueprints more carefully, his mind automatically thinking like a martial artist planning strategy. How well are those passages monitored? Some have basic electronic surveillance, but most rely on physical locks and the assumption that unauthorized personnel wouldn't know they exist, Harrison admitted. If the attackers have detailed inside information, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood that the building's hidden passages had likely become highways for the enemy. Morrison made a decision that would define the next hour. Commander Harrison, I need you to maintain your current defensive positions and keep trying to re-establish contact with the missing teams. Thompson and I will take Mr. Chen and attempt to intercept the attackers using the service passages. Inspector, with respect, that's an extremely dangerous plan, Harrison protested. These passages are poorly lit, have limited communication coverage, and offer numerous opportunities for ambush. Taking a civilian into that environment, this civilian has proven he can handle himself in combat, Morrison interrupted. And, right now, unconventional thinking might be our best advantage. The attackers are counting on us following standard response protocols. Marcus felt the familiar pre-competition nervousness that always preceded his most challenging matches. The difference was that losing this match could cost lives rather than just points on a scoreboard. What's the plan? Morrison pointed to several locations on the blueprints. We enter through the maintenance access near the east wing, move through the tunnel system parallel to the attacker's likely route, and try to intercept them before they reach the third floor. If we're lucky, we can catch them from an unexpected direction. Thompson shouldered his rifle and checked his communications equipment. I can guide us through the passages I remember from training, but I should warn you, some of those tunnels haven't been properly maintained in decades. We might encounter structural problems or dead ends. The entry to Westminster's hidden passages required special security clearance that Morrison's authority could provide. They descended through a maintenance door that looked like it led to a utility closet but actually opened onto a metal staircase leading deep into the building's foundations. The tunnels were everything Thompson had warned about and worse. Ancient brick walls wept with moisture. Electrical systems from multiple eras created a confusing tangle of wires and conduits, and the air carried the musty smell of centuries-old stone. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, creating pools of light separated by stretches of near-total darkness. "Stay close and move quietly," Morrison whispered as they began navigating the maze of passages. "If the attackers are down here too, sound will carry farther than you expect." They had been moving for 15 minutes when Thompson suddenly held up his hand, signaling them to stop. In the distance, barely audible above their own breathing, came the sound of voices speaking in a foreign language. The attackers were indeed using the tunnel system, and they were close. Marcus felt his body automatically shifting into combat readiness. His breathing became controlled and deliberate, his muscles relaxed but prepared for explosive action. The confined space of the tunnels would limit movement options for everyone, making close combat skills more important than firearms training. Morrison activated her radio for a whispered status report. "Command, we have audio contact with suspects in the tunnel system. Proceeding to intercept." The response crackled with static but was audible. "Inspector, be advised we've lost contact with the Churchill Room security detail. Unknown if dignitaries are still secure." The stakes had just escalated dramatically. If the protective detail in the Churchill Room had been compromised, the foreign dignitaries were essentially defenseless. The attackers might have already achieved their primary objective, or they might be preparing for the final phase of their assault. Thompson motioned toward a side passage that appeared to lead in the direction of the voices. The tunnel was narrower than the main route, forcing them to move in single file, but it might allow them to get ahead of the attackers and establish an ambush position. As they moved through the cramped passage, Marcus's martial arts training helped him maintain balance and control in the difficult terrain. The uneven floor and low ceiling created challenges that reminded him of obstacle course training he had done to improve his agility and adaptability. The voices became clearer as they approached, and Marcus recognized one of them. Viktor Petrov, the businessman from the palace incident, was apparently coordinating this part of the operation by radio from his jail cell. His voice came through on what must have been a communication device carried by one of the attackers. "Phase 3 initiation in 7 minutes, Petrov's voice instructed in English. "Eliminate remaining security, secure the targets, and prepare for extraction. The diversion at the warehouse has bought us the time we needed." Morrison, Thompson, and Marcus exchanged grim looks. The entire day's events had been choreographed to lead to this moment. The palace attack, the warehouse raid, even Marcus's involvement. All of it had been calculated to position security resources exactly where the attackers wanted them. But as they prepared for what might be their final confrontation, Marcus realized that the attackers had made one critical miscalculation. They had planned for police responses, military protocols, and standard security procedures. They hadn't planned for a tourist with a black belt who had already disrupted their operation twice and had no intention of stopping now. The tunnel ahead opened into a larger chamber that appeared to connect with the building's main structure. Emergency lighting revealed several passages leading in different directions, creating the perfect location for either an ambush or a desperate last stand. Marcus checked his watch. According to Petrov's radio instructions, they had 6 minutes to prevent an international incident that could change the course of diplomatic relations for years to come. 6 minutes to prove that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by armies or police forces, but by ordinary people who refuse to let evil succeed. Thompson raised his weapon and nodded to Morrison and Marcus. Whatever happens next, it's been an honor serving with both of you. Marcus settled into a fighting stance that combined elements from both his martial arts disciplines, his body and mind completely focused on the challenge ahead. Let's finish this. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels and the final confrontation began.